Hello, welcome to module number 7. Hope you've had a great week and a good weekend. We will jump into module number 7. There are 2 chapters that you're reading this week. The first is on students with disabilities in elementary classrooms, and then the second one is on students with disabilities in secondary classrooms. And the overall premise of this week is on differentiation. And so there's several resources that you will read linked into the discussion post for this week on differentiation, but I thought I would go into a little bit more detail. When you read the 2 chapters, one of the things they talk about is differentiation and also collaboration between the general education teacher and the special education teacher. And I think one of the best ways that can be done is through a co-teaching model. And so what I thought we would do with this module is jump into co-teaching in a little bit more detail. And then the videos that you will see this week are all different examples of co-teaching. So when we think about really what is the best practice way of highly differentiating instruction so that special education truly is about specially designed instruction, and what's the best practice in collaboration, co-teaching is a perfect example. So let's jump into that. So one of the things that I think is different, and several of you have talked about this, that you have paraprofessionals or whatever the term may be in your district for support roles, support assistants that are helping you meet the needs of your students. That falls into inclusion. That's certainly a great practice that meets the needs of a lot of our students, but that is different than co-teaching. And so one of the things that I always think is important to start with when we break down what is co-teaching is that it's different. It is 2 licensed teachers in a classroom supporting each other and supporting the students. That is very different from 1 teacher and 1 assistant or paraprofessional in a classroom meeting the needs of students. So one of my biggest pet peeves is if I walk into a classroom and I see a gen ed teacher and a special ed teacher, and one of those individuals could be replaced by an aide. We don't need 2 teachers in that classroom. So really, what is provided in co-teaching ought to be different. When you have a licensed teacher supporting another licensed teacher, that's quite a commitment from the school district, and that should look very different. That special education teacher should be doing something very unique from what a paraprofessional can be doing. So let's jump into the co-teaching models. There are, as I said, there are videos about co-teaching linked in Canvas. This is one teach, one assist. And so this is one that can also sometimes can feel, if you're not careful, like the person doing the assisting could be replaced by a paraprofessional. And so one of the things that makes this co-teaching is that the roles should change. So in a true co-teaching model where you're doing 1 teach, 1 assist, it doesn't mean the general education teacher is always the one teaching the whole class and the special education teachers are the one assisting. Those roles should flip-flop periodically, so that both teachers are getting the opportunity to teach the whole class and both teachers are getting the opportunity to assist students, and it just depends on the content and the structure of what's being taught. Another thing that you will hear sometimes or you'll see as you research co-teaching is 1 teach, 1 observe. Same premise. Sometimes this is useful if you're collecting data on IEP goals or assessments that are being done. And again, it shouldn't always be the special education teacher that's the one doing the observing. So this one is pretty simple. This is a great place to start if you're just beginning co-teaching. But again, the roles need to change. Parallel teaching is where you divide the classroom in half. And so the gen ed teacher takes half of the class, the special education teacher takes the other half of the class. And this is a great way, if you have 2 teachers in a classroom, that you can make the class size for that classroom more manageable. So it allows you to provide more in-depth instruction or support to your students because you're able to work with half of the class. One of the problems, and you'll see this in one of the videos that is linked in there with parallel teaching, is that it can be disruptive when you have, especially if both groups are in the same classroom and there's not a lot of space. It can be loud, it can be distracting for students that have attention difficulties, but it can certainly be a very positive model depending on the content being taught. Alternative teaching is one where, again, one that's pretty familiar if you've done co-teaching before, and you may not have even known that you were doing alternative teaching. But this is where one teacher is teaching a larger group of the students, and then another teacher is working on content with a smaller group. So again, the roles should change. It shouldn't always be the general education teacher with the larger group. And the special ed teacher doing remediation. It shouldn't always be that way. Those roles should change periodically. It may be that the small group is a group that needs enrichment. And so that's another great opportunity to think differently about alternative teaching from how we do it. The other piece is that this small group shouldn't always be the same group. So it shouldn't be that these are the 4 kids who have an IEP in this classroom and they're always going back to get extra remediation. It should be based on the data. It should be based on the formative assessments that are being done, the exit tickets that are being done, what needs to happen to best meet the needs of students. And this group that's at the back of the room or at the front of the room, wherever they happen to be, should change each day, each time you do this, based on the data that has been collected. Station teaching, particularly if you're at an elementary, you know station teaching well. Having 2 teachers manning different stations. Sometimes the other station is a technology station or some kind of independent station or group work station that doesn't require adult supervision. But the nice thing about co-teaching and having 2 licensed teachers in the classroom is that you, in small groups, can have 2 teachers providing very different focused instruction and intervention to students through stations. Several of you talked about stations in your lesson plans that you submitted last week, and one of the things that multiple of you mentioned is the importance of setting expectations and clear instructions for independent workstations, and that you've done that. You did that at the beginning of the year, and you know that you have to revisit those expectations on a regular basis to make sure that station time is meaningful for students. So stations are a great way to meet the needs of students in smaller groups, and particularly when you have that second licensed teacher in the classroom. Team teaching is basically exactly how it looks here. Both teachers kind of at the front of the room or circulating in the room. Both are delivering the content for the lesson. So, the thing about team teaching is you do have to be a little bit more orchestrated to know who's going to do what, particularly when you're both in front of the classroom leading that lesson, knowing what role each of you is going to play. But once you get that, this one I would say is a little bit harder to do from the very beginning, just because you do have to have that relationship. You have to be able to read each other pretty well, and so it may not come naturally at first. But team teaching is a great way to get into co-teaching. So as you think about those different co-teaching models, as I said, there are videos in Canvas that show classrooms where these are being done at both the elementary, actually even preschool level, elementary level, and then up to the secondary level. The thing that I have found as I've done co-teaching with different districts that I've been is that it's very easy to get into a routine. So if you really like station teaching, and you're fortunate enough to have a co-teacher, you might often default to station teaching. And one of the things that I've often said is you really need to be using all of these different models. Definitely not at first, but as you become more adept at co-teaching, each of these different models should be in your repertoire so that you're using each model about 20% of the time, and really seeing the benefit as you're planning that each model can have in the content that you're delivering. So it's really important to not get stuck in that routine, not get stuck in that rut, and experience all the different models that are out there in co-teaching. So again, I know not everyone's fortunate enough to do co-teaching, but it is a great model and one that can have really dramatic impacts on your student achievement. So hopefully, if you don't have the opportunity to go to do co-teaching yet in your role, at some point in your career you will. because it really can meet a lot of our students' needs in their general education classroom. This week's video, as I've talked about, you've got several co-teaching videos. They're all very short, 3 or 4 minutes, but they really do give you a good summary of each of the different models that we just went through. Then you've got a differentiation discussion post, and in that post there are some other resources for you to use, as well as the text. And then you're creating a visual aid this week that highlights differentiation. And then you do have a SWOT analysis that is due this week that requires you to connect with another classmate to complete. So you can be getting on that early in the week so that you've got time to get that completed as well. That's it for this week. Please let me know if you have any questions, and I look forward to seeing your work. Thanks.